Hey everyone, welcome back to Kubrick Corner with me, Sean Wilson. So we're at that halfway stage of the year, and what film journalists, film critics like myself like to do is we like to do a sort of midpoint of the year to ruminate on what's come before, what's coming sort of later on in the year, and we like to sort of round up our best and worst films that we've seen so far because everyone likes a list, and believe me, with film critics, this almost becomes like a kind of compulsion. You start to amass these lists in your head. And also, I think, as far as I'm concerned, it's kind of a sort of statement in a way, which is that it's almost a fight against that really tired cliched statement. They don't make them like they used to, because I read this all the time. I read that, from various people, or I hear it from various people, I've not seen any films in the cinema this year, it's all been rubbish, there's not been anything good out. Well, I'm here with this list. One of the aims is to prove that is not only nonsense, but also there have been lots and lots of really, really great movies out this year. And hopefully what the following list will prove is that not only is it the big movies that have been really, really good this year, but there are also some unseen gems which hopefully I will help draw your attention towards, because I actually think that is one of the most important jobs any film critic can do, is to draw your attention to a film that you might not otherwise have heard of. I kind of think that's vital. So let's kick off at number 10, shall we? With Ghost Stories, which is the absolutely joyously entertaining theatrical adaptation by Andy Nyman and Jeremy Dyson, famous for The League of Gentlemen. They adapt their own long-running stage play, which began in 2010 and famously scared audiences witless. They now bring that onto the big screen, sort of staying truthful to its structure, which is basically there are three ghost stories that play out in front of you, all linked by Andy Nyman's Professor Goodman, and gradually over the course of the drama you start to realise that maybe what this is about is it's about him, and it's about the awakening of him as a character, and these ghost stories are used as like a conduit to explore the sort of dark recesses of his character. I have to say I really enjoyed this film. It's got a real lovely visual palette to it that honours sort of old Amicus British anthology movies. Everything's very windswept, very melancholy, very grey. It's got some really delightful jump scare shocks in it, but it's also got a genuine sense of the uncanny, and this is obviously critical when you're dealing with anything involving the supernatural. It can't just make you jump, it's also got to make you realise that you're coming into contact with something that's genuinely paranormal and weird. Brilliant performances from Martin Freeman, Paul Whitehouse and Alex Lawther as the men involved in variously involved in each of the three hauntings. Again, overseen by a brilliant performance by Andy Nyman as Goodman, who rapidly unravels over the course of the movie. Brilliant score by Frank Ilfman that envelops you in this kind of gothic atmosphere. So yeah, number 10, Ghost Stories, and the first of three horror movies on this list, which proves that it's been a really, really good year for chillers so far. So that is it at number 10, Ghost Stories. Now at number 9, we have the first animated film on this list, which is The Breadwinner, which is directed by Nora Twomey, Irish director, working with, it's the latest film from the makers of The Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea, both of which are hand-drawn animated films I absolutely adored. I thought they were both beautiful films. And what this does, it takes that very, very lush visual style and it applies it to a much more politically charged story about about a young girl living under Taliban rule in Afghanistan prior to the American invasion in the wake of 9/11, and it fuses it. And it's a very interesting film in that it's got a foot in that fantastical fairy tale fable structure which Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea both occupied with, yet it also has a much more sort of pointed sort of factual edge to it, which is how do fairy tales and folk tales give us an emotional truth, even if they don't have a literal truth? How do they help get us through very difficult times? What can they tell us about the best and the worst of human nature? I thought this was a beautiful film. It was Oscar nominated for Best Animated Feature but didn't win. I think, which is a sign of how brilliant animation has been recently, the fact that this didn't win. Really, really lovely, really heartfelt movie. Honestly, if you hadn't heard of it or you hadn't seen it, go and check it out. The Breadwinner, directed by Nora Twomey, in at number 9. And at number 8, we have the second horror movie on this list, A Quiet Place. I dare say most of you have seen this. John Krasinski's directorial debut, and really announced him as this extraordinary force of nature. I mean, John Krasinski is best known as an actor from the likes of the American version of The Office, and also the 13 Hours Benghazi film directed by Michael Bay. I have to say, nothing that John Krasinski has done as an actor has really grabbed me necessarily, but honestly, he should just forego all that and just make horror films for the rest of his career, because it's a real force of nature, this film. And you know the storyline: family are hunted by creatures that hunt by sounds. Really lovely sort of way that it takes it back to the sort of primal nature of early cinema. The fact that there is very little dialogue, and when there is dialogue, it's really judiciously well done. Lovely use of sound becomes a character in the movie, and it's all about how do you what you strip out of the audio in the film in order to make something incredibly chilling and incredibly scary. And I really hope that all of you are able to go and see this movie with a well-behaved audience, because the slightest rustling and the slightest slurp of a drink would have ruined this for me. I was very lucky I got to enjoy this in all its immersive, almost near silent glory. Brilliant performances from Krasinski himself, and namely Emily Blunt, also Millicent Simmons and Noah Jupe as the two imperiled children at the centre of the drama. Really good, sort of jumpy, creepy, thought-provoking movie that also finds time for lots of quiet moments. There's a lovely moment involving Neil Young's song Harvest Moon, which I think might actually be my favourite bit in the whole film. So it's a very human story, it's a very scary one, and announces John Krasinski as a real talent. That is A Quiet Place in at number 8. And number 7, an interesting one, which I imagine many of you won't have heard of. This is directed by Muli Surya, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Marlena the Murderer in 4 acts, which is an Indonesian black comedy western revenge odyssey, which got a fairly limited release over here in the UK. But I would say if you haven't seen it, I would urge you to go check it out, because it is one of the strangest films I've seen all year, and precisely for that reason, because it kept me on edge throughout, and it kept me guessing as to exactly where it was going. I thought it was brilliantly and genuinely unpredictable. The story is that the central character of Marlena is assaulted by a group of men. She lives on an Indonesian island that has a very traditional patriarchal structure, and she basically bucks that, and she goes out to and basically enacts revenge on the people that have done this sort of awful wrong to her. So there are elements of the Sergio Leone Western, there are elements of very sort of grotesque Quentin Tarantino black comedy in it, but it plays out, as the title implies, in sort of four different acts. And what each of those acts takes on a different tone, whether it's black comedy, whether there are elements of poignancy, or whether there are elements of genuine, quite awful shock. It's a statement about gender parity. I attended a talk after the screening that I went to about the role of women filmmakers in Indonesia, and about how that basically Muli Surya is basically continuing this new generation of women filmmakers in Indonesia. So it's a real important political film as well. It's a real important statement for equality. Marlena the Murderer in 4 acts. Go and see it, because it's genuinely peculiar and genuinely quite brilliant. And now we get into number 6 with a film that is out at the moment, Hereditary, directed by Ari Aster, who makes his feature film debut. You might have seen my review here on the Kubrick Corner channel already. Really good, creepy movie, really interesting horror movie that doesn't do jumpy, shrieky, gory tactics, but actually is a tale of psychological angst and about inherited evil and genetic evil, and about how the real terror remains rooted in the family unit, and about how terrifyingly there is often evil inherent within our own natures that has been passed down to us by our parents, and that is inescapable and sort of puts us at the mercy of forces beyond our control. Beautifully directed by Ari Aster, who uses the idea of the models that Toni Collette's character makes as a kind of a metaphor for the situation that the characters are in this movie. Beautifully directed, brilliantly acted across the board. Toni Collette gives a bravura performance as this mother, Annie, who is coming apart at the seams across the Of course, the drama, you also have Millie Shapiro, who plays the very disturbed young daughter Charlie with that tongue clucking noise that she makes. Really, really provocative, really interesting film that will stick with you and will leave you with lots and lots of questions. Again, it proves that the production company A24 really do have cornered the market in these very interesting, provocative, strange little indie dramas, including horrors. They also distributed The Witch. If you're brave enough to go and see Hereditary, go and see it, because it will remind you of classics like The Shining and Rosemary's Baby. Not so The Exorcist, which I've seen on the poster. I don't think that does it a service, really. Go in expecting something like Rosemary's Baby, and you will have a really, really good time with it. Hereditary in at number 6. And now at number 5, we have an Oscar winner. Now, this is always a tricky thing with making these lists, because you have to decide what period are you taking films from. My rule is if it's released between the 1st of January of a particular year and the 31st of December a particular year, it's valid to go in a list. So I'm choosing The Shape of Water in at number 5, and I'm aware that this came out in the USA last year, but it came out in February over here, therefore I think it's valid for inclusion. And what that means is I try not to pick too many films that came out in the Oscar period, because otherwise that doesn't leave room for anything else later in the year. So this is the Oscar movie that I'm choosing this year, and for one reason alone, because it was my favourite out of the clutch of Oscar movies this year. I thought it was brilliant. I actually saw this at the London Film Festival last year. Guillermo del Toro is sort of Cold War fantasy, sci-fi fable about the love affair between Sally Hawkins' mute cleaner and the amphibious creature played by Doug Jones. It's scary, it's funny, it's almost perversely romantic. Guillermo del Toro has talked about that, which has taken, of course, a lot of people off guard by how sexually frank it is. But again, I think that's what gives the movie a lot of its residual character. Beautifully shot by Dan Lausterson, immaculately scored by Alexandre Desplat, who envelops the audience in this sense of romantic whimsy with accordions and flutes. Terrific supporting cast: Michael Shannon, Richard Jenkins, Octavia Spencer, Michael Stuhlbarg. Really, 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 really good film. It's a film lover's film. I've spoken to lots of people who admitted to have been completely baffled by this movie. I wasn't baffled by it. As a fan of Guillermo del Toro anyway, I think this got him back on peak form after the somewhat more wobbly interludes of Pacific Rim and Crimson Peak. So if you haven't seen The Shape of Water yet, no doubt it will be out on DVD soon. So in at number 5, Shape of Water. And now we get into the top 4 stage, which is Avengers Infinity War. Now, I'm aware that this is currently very, very high up, and I'm aware that I've positioned it above both an Oscar-winning movie and also Hereditary, which is generating a lot of acclaim at the moment. But the simple fact of the matter is I thought Avengers Infinity War was an incredible achievement. I know a lot of people have criticised it for being overstuffed. Well, of course it's overstuffed. I mean, this is a culmination of 10 years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You're not going to get a threadbare movie in which sort of the group of people sit down and have a chat over tea. This is basically both a culmination and a celebration of 10 years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in which everything comes to a head. That means everything is bigger. The cast is bigger, the stakes are bigger, the spectacle is bigger. But also what I was really, really impressed by with this movie, having watched it, was how much it shocked me. It's dark. There are genuinely dark developments in it that did genuinely take me by surprise. I think any big blockbuster tentpole movie that can take me by surprise is doing a really, really good job. I mean, goodness knows it's really easy to become jaded by blockbuster movies, particularly by superhero movies, a lot of which follow the same template. This really took me by surprise, and I think the Russo brothers, the directors, did an absolutely terrific job with this. And I thought Josh Brolin as Thanos did a really, really good job of taking a potentially one-dimensional character and investing him with his own troubling notes of morality, and you really got a sense that although he's a universe-conquering supervillain, he is grappling with his own demons as well. I thought that was a really, really great performance. Loved Alan Silvestri's score, and it genuinely left me wondering where on earth is the Marvel Cinematic Universe going to go from here. Obviously, we've got Ant-Man and the Wasp out in August. We've got Captain Marvel out in March next year. Then we've got the as yet untitled Avengers 4. So this is building the next chapter of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I came out of this thinking, I genuinely don't know where this franchise is now going. Isn't that a really exciting thing to be able to say about a massive, great big blockbuster movie? So in at number 4, Avengers Infinity War. I imagine most of you have seen it. If you haven't, seriously go and check it out because it's really terrific. Now in at number 3, we have Sweet Country, which is an Australian movie directed by Warwick Thornton. Now, I imagine, like Marlena the Murderer in Four Acts, many of you might not have seen or even heard of this movie, but it's a really genuinely very, very interesting film that tackles a lot of very, very complex ideas within this almost Western structure. Again, actually, it's interesting. It is actually quite similar to Marlena the Murderer in that sense. Basically, what you have is you have a character who's played by Hamilton Morris, who is an Aboriginal man who is accused of the murder of a white man. This is almost like turn of the century movie set in outback Australia, in which racial tensions are at an absolute peak. And what you get is an incredible sense of time and location. It's one of the most visually beautiful films I've seen all year. It's this sort of sun-scorched landscape, which really casts a hard shining light on how appalling the racial injustice was at this period in Australian history. Terrific supporting performances from veterans like Sam Neill and Brian Brown. It culminates in, well, it doesn't culminate. There is a very, very interesting sequence. There is a courtroom sequence in which almost one is tempted to invoke the phrase kangaroo court, and you have to really see the movie to understand what that is. It doesn't labour the metaphor like that, but it's very, very hard to get that out of your head. But again, this is the kind of material that the movie is dealing with. It takes metaphorical constructs and it makes them visual, and it's incredibly visceral and very shockingly violent and disturbing, and it holds a mirror up to the society that we're in at the moment. Owes a great deal to classic Australia set films like Walkabout, the Nick Rogue film. I think that history is very much on display. I think Warwick Thornton does a brilliant job in marshalling a very, very difficult and yet visually arresting story. What the challenging nature of the material sits against this incredible landscape, which makes it a very, very challenging watch. So go and see it if you can. That's Sweet Country in number 3. And now we're into the number 2 spot, which is Custody, which is the feature film debut by French filmmaker Xavier Legrand. And bearing in mind I've already had 3 horror films on this list so far, this isn't a horror film, it's a domestic drama, thriller I suppose you could call it. This film scared me more than any of the other films on this list. Essentially, it is a story about a disintegrating family. There is a husband and wife who have divorced. The children are kind of caught in the middle, one of whom, the older daughter, is free to make her own decisions, but tragically the son, who is younger, is forced to enter into custody with his father, who, it is strongly implied and then very, very quickly revealed, is an abusive monster with an incredibly violent temper. And you find out this is what has led to the breakdown of the family unit, and now the boy, the son, is directly in the firing line of this father's boiling rage. And what this film does brilliantly, is it contrasts the physicality of the 2 central actors. You've got Denis Ménochet, who's best known as the farmer from the opening sequence of Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards, as the father, who is incredibly big, burly, imposing actor, versus the very sort of vulnerable, frail Thomas Gloria playing the son. And what you get are a lot of scenes of the two of them sharing space in a car, and you get a real sense of the physicality of the 2 actors. It is used to incredibly frightening effect, and the movie culminates in what is, I think, the scariest sequence of any film this year. And it's not scary in the sense that it's supernatural, it's scary in the sense that it's rooted very, very much in human weakness, and it really makes you confront that really appalling nature of how terrible people can be. And it also finds how decent people can be in hard circumstances as well. It's an incredibly grueling watch. It really took me by surprise. It's called Custody. Go and see it, and prepare to really be amazed. Now, at number 1, we have Black Panther, which is, of course, the second Marvel movie on this list, and I think not only the best Marvel movie so far this year, but also my favourite film of the year. I think that what I want when I go and see a movie is I want a complete tapestry. I want everything. I want a movie that entertains, that surprises, that moves, that makes me laugh, that is provocative, that deals with incredible themes. There's no denying that Black Panther does all of this. I've spoken to several people in the wake of the movie's release who've said, yeah, well, the storyline's a bit weak, isn't it? I don't think it's weak at all. I interviewed producer Nate Moore about what the importance of this film, and he said, "Well, you've got to understand this is the first superhero movie with a primarily black ensemble cast. We're not talking about a superhero movie in which just the main character is black, like Blade, which, let's not forget, that's the Marvel movie, non-MCU Marvel movie that gets lost in all of this." But he said you've got to understand that this is really, really important. This is a real political statement in the guise of what is essentially a big, rousing Marvel blockbuster movie in which that you get a real sense of freshness both in the landscape, from the Wakandan landscape, the costumes that everyone is wearing, that lovely sense of tribal dress, which reminded me a lot of a film last year, a documentary, well, not a documentary, but a fact-based film called I Am Not a Witch, which dealt with very much with African tribal customs. It reminded me a lot of that. And also you get terrific performances. Chadwick Boseman in the title role. You get Michael B. Jordan as possibly the best Marvel villain to date, or if not the most complex Marvel villain to date, because you actually do start to understand what his beef is with the hero. And the brilliance of the film is it makes you question your own ethics. You have really massive, great big set pieces. A terrific score by Ludwig Göransson. Yeah, I thought it was a really, really impressively entertaining film. It left me thinking, it left me entertained. It's also quite clearly a watershed moment in blockbuster history and superhero history, and also in sort of Hollywood pop culture history. And one can only hope that this will now act as a sea change for further superhero movies and further movies of this ilk further down the chain in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Black Panther is my #1 film of the year. We have to wait and see whether it will still be at #1 by the end of the year. But that's the way it stands at the moment. Loved it. And if you agree, disagree with my choices, drop me a comment here at Kubrick Corner. And stay tuned for my worst films of the year list, which will be coming very, very soon. See you soon.